Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. We're streaming live on Twitch, twitch.tv/socialism S4A, and I'm joined here on January 11, 2024, by 50 viewers in the chat, so welcome to everyone there. And we haven't streamed in a few weeks. I'm actually sitting on two past streams which I recorded and haven't edited and posted yet. It's the end of the year, a lot of things happening in December, especially towards the end. And I was really concentrating on the channel. Actually, speaking of, I'll put this up on the screen. Really concentrating on getting through some readings that this is what we've been doing lately. I am proud of us as far as I wanted to do the Hoxha readings on Palestine and then the preliminary readings on the Sino-Soviet split playlist so that people would know what Hoxha is talking about as far as Soviet revisionism or social imperialism. So, yeah, and then just yesterday we posted two articles, one by Bill Bland and then one was a biography of Bill Bland. And if you want to see what's coming up on the channel, also check out the biography of Bill Bland, because I put in some notes about what's going to be coming up on the channel in that as well. But actually, speaking of readings and things like that, here are some of the readings. Put this up on the screen. There we go. These are some of the readings that are coming up on the channel. I probably will do these pretty much in order, but they're going to be a few which are longer, and so I'll be skipping around those just to get the schedule right. You know, we have a pretty good amount of support for this channel, which is non-commercial, viewer-supported. We don't run ads or do sponsorships, so the patrons, who we'll be thanking in just a minute, play a critical part in my being able to spend a lot of time on this channel. But you know, we're coming up on the 4th anniversary of doing the channel, and I think we're going to be hitting about 20,000 subscribers. See, it's not even real to me yet. 20,000 subscribers by about the 4th anniversary. We're at like 19.4 roughly right now, and that's great to see. Channel's been growing steadily for a long time, but basically, it's taken about this long just for me to figure out how to do this thing on a consistent basis and in a sustainable way. Because basically for the first few years I really threw myself into this channel, just kind of burning the candle at both ends, really trying to build it up because A, it's a topic that I'm passionate about and wanted to learn more about, and I wanted to do a lot of reading, and we were getting a lot of feedback and engagement, and you know, there was just a lot to address. There was a lot to say, there was a lot of readings to do, and there was a lot of other kind of current event stuff to interact with and engage with. And here we are 4 years later, but I feel like I'm finally kind of coming out to a point where I have a sense of how to do this thing in a way that doesn't leave me, you know, sort of, when you overextend or if you're working on the wrong stuff, it's easy to feel like, you know, sort of, and I know other people who have run channels or done streaming have felt, you know, sort of hopeless at times, or like, what's the point? But to me, that's more of an indicator that something just needs to change. And I do feel like I kind of actually worked out those changes. And so I'll be doing readings, probably just uploading twice a week, although there may be multiple videos in that. I just find if I'm uploading very much more often than that, the whole process, I like to read the comments, I like to respond to the comments, I do moderate the comments, so not every comment gets posted. It doesn't mean that you're banned, it just means I didn't necessarily publish that comment, though sometimes it might mean you're banned if the comment was such that I wouldn't ever want to hear anything that that person had to say again. But in any case, yeah, that's a lot of work, and it can be very enriching and rewarding, and I learn a lot from it. But also, and I hope that other people do too, because I do see people coming back to the channel regularly. I assume they're getting something out of it. But as much as it is beneficial and you know, just does a lot for me personally, You know, it's somewhat draining. I mean, it takes a lot out of me. It requires a lot of energy. So, again, trying to figure out how to do this on a really sustainable basis as we go into year number 5 starting next month. That's, anyway, that's amazing just saying that we've actually come this far. So, anyway, appreciation there. But these are the upcoming texts that I plan to do. We did hit that goal of doing the Sino-Soviet split initial mini-series playlist. There's a lot more that is written on that topic from both the side of the USSR and the Chinese side. But for now, we're going to kind of leave it there as an intro. These on the screen, and there's really another list that's about as long. I'll start showing that after we get through more of this list. But basically, these are cleanup side readings referenced in footnotes and things that we haven't already read on the channel. There are other readings that were referenced in footnotes and so forth that already are on the channel, but I wanted to do more of these. A few of these are long, like the economic content of Narodism, which was like Russian populism. That one's kind of long. Also, the class struggles in France by Marx are kind of long, so those first 2 ones are kind of long. A lot of the rest of these can be done in one sitting or so. They're like 45 minutes to an hour, probably, videos. Some are shorter than that, but that's like about as long as most of the rest of them get. And, you know, I can do one of those in a day, roughly. Takes definitely longer to record the thing than the actual video length is. Like, by the time the video actually exports and is uploaded, and I've actually added all the tags and the video description and all that, you can figure it's triple the time of the actual video, if not like 4 times the time. So anyway, there's a significant amount of time involved, but I do want to blast through this, and I've been getting better at that. But anyway, that's some of what's coming up, and I did mention the patrons, so let's thank the patrons. There you go, and the Buy Me a Coffee supporters. If you'd like to get your name on the screen like these fine folks, patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall are the addresses. Head over there for a few dollars a month or more. You can pitch in. And kind of where I was going with that is we're at a consistent level of support now of about $1,000 to $1,100 a month. And again, no ads, nothing. That's what we've got. And that is enough for me to do what I'm doing now on a consistent basis. I was just talking in the last streams about expanding with an additional stream, probably a couple times a month. That would be Cooking with S4A. More of political economy of food, as well as some recipe kind of stuff, because knowing how to cook is really important. It's a valuable life skill that people don't always learn. And even if you do learn it, cooking healthy stuff with basic raw ingredients, it's good for your body. It's also cheaper in most cases. So we'll be going through things like, you know, wheat, barley, corn, rice, you know, the kind of staple grains, and what to do with them. You know, like you buy these things in the store. They're cheap, much cheaper than buying pre-prepared food. But what do you do with them? You know, do you have to soak them? Do you have to, like, how do you turn them into? How do you get that goodness in your body? So we'll be covering that, as well as, again, like the political economy of food and some of the political histories of foods. But what I realized is, as much as I would like to launch into that right away, I think that's going to be more of a goal when we start hitting more like 1,400, 1,500, 1,600 a month, like around 1,500 a month. I think at that point, that'll be the next thing that we add in. So, yeah. But the good news is we have a lot of good readings coming up, and we'll be streaming at least every other week or so. And, you know, a lot of content. So, all right. In addition to that, we do community posts. Let's take a look quickly at what we have been putting up on the community tab. And these also do get cross-posted over onto the Medium and the Substack as well as on Patreon. I'm a little bit behind on cross-posting that. But anyway, here's some of what I've been sharing. I just put this up yesterday. So this is another channel. I do watch other communist channels to a certain extent. A lot of them are revisionist and or just drama oriented, to the point of I'm not really interested in that. What I've been watching more of, actually, is, I guess, what you could call honest bourgeois economics channels, sort of like investment analysis and things like that, and not talking about CNN or CNBC, the really mainstream stuff. I find that the really mainstream channels are more oriented around misleading the public so that they keep spending money and investing in things in the way that the ultra rich want. Whereas the channels that I've been watching more to get a sense of really what's going on in the economy is, I guess you could say, more petty bourgeois in their outlook. But it's, for people who are serious investors but are trying to, kind of cut through the mainstream bullshit that the big money puts out there through the biggest media. And so these are people who are doing analysis involving looking at economic data that is important to look at, whether you're petty bourgeois and you're trying to, profit off the system or maintain kind of that lifestyle, or you're a proletarian and you just want to know what's up with where is capitalism in its particular cycles. Anyway, this channel, Reventure Consulting, I find this guy's one of the more, it's very thoughtful analysis as far as the data that he gets into, but it's also one of the more palatable in that he's sort of more humane and less, some of these channels are just super fucking scummy and sleazy. This guy is a bit more humane with his approach to talking about the average person's standard of living and, the kind of suffering that causes. But anyway, this video in particular goes through credit card company public reports that they put out to show that actually people are spending way less money, and this past holiday season, which is, of course, at the end of the fiscal year, the companies are all looking for major revenue to shore up the end-of-year profits. And this year, once you account for inflation, and he goes through it in the video, but basically, right now inflation's at 3.1%, and the holiday shopping was 3.1% up over last year. So if you look at the mainstream news reports, all of them were like, holiday sales up 3.1% over last year. But the problem is when you account for inflation, they're actually up 0%. So that was just enough to keep up with inflation, which actually makes 2023 the worst performing year in quite a while. So there are signs of economic contraction, and of course there's layoffs and other things happening. So it does look like we are at the start of a recession. And along those lines, there was another video which is even shorter. It's another channel, EPB Research. It's just like a 6.5-minute video titled "This Chart Predicts Every Recession." I'd actually like to show you a little bit of that right now because I don't think that many people watched it, just judging from the amount of likes on the post. Actually, I find that the when I share videos, it's they always get fewer, less engagement than images get. But in this case, I think that this video is kind of important, so let's watch a bit of it.
The Conference Board Leading Index is objectively the single most reliable recession indicator that exists, with a perfect track record dating back more than 6 decades. The Conference Board Leading Index is a basket of 10 individual indicators that are each reliable in their own right, but when combined into one broad basket, the collection provides a smoother and more reliable signal about the future direction of the economy. The Conference Board Leading Index is comprised of individual indicators such as new building permits, the yield curve, new manufacturing orders, jobless claims, and yes, even stock prices. Each of these individual indicators have a relatively strong track record of forecasting changes in the economy, but any single indicator is subject to false signals and head fakes. However, when you take 10 indicators that are each reliable on their own, with a few false flags each, and aggregate them into one broad basket, the number of false signals is dramatically reduced to the point where there have been 0 false signals dating back to earlier than 1960. According to the Conference Board, when the 6-month growth rate of the Conference Board Leading Index drops below -4.5%, a recession signal is triggered. There were a few times when the Conference Board Leading Index fell into negative territory, like in 1967, 1995, 1998, and 2016, but not sufficiently below the negative 4.5% threshold. There has not been one instance where that negative 4.5% recession threshold was breached when the economic cycle did not conclude in a hard landing.
Okay, so you have it there on the screen, and basically what they're showing is this Conference Board Leading Index, which is pretty much a bulletproof indicator of a recession starting. Recessions are characterized by unemployment going up, which tends to happen very quickly. It's not a gradual rise. Unemployment will be more gradual on the way down, but when it's going up, it tends to go up rapidly. So anyway, this is a basket of economic indicators which individually they will have some false signals, but when you put them all together, they balance out and you get an extremely steady indicator. When this thing goes below negative 4.5%, it's a recession, and that's been reliable for more than half a century. It's not just that it goes below zero, it has to go below 4.5%. So if you look on the right side of the chart where we are now, it has done that, and it's actually well into that territory. The depth below 4.5% is not necessarily a one-to-one correlator with how heavy the recession is going to be, but it does indicate that it's on the way. So party's over. Basically, the system has been on life support for some time, and we're going to see another crash. What the people who run the system decide to do about it, in other words, like we had an incident earlier this year, in the past 12 months, about 9-10 months ago, in March, with the collapse of SVB and Signature. And so they bailed those out, but they called it not a bailout. But it did involve the Federal Reserve, buying up the assets. They can't get these assets off their books. They've been just dumping money into the system, buying up worthless things. And that's, as we've covered over the last few streams now for some time, they've been doing this basically ever since 2008, of increasing the reserves, and they can't get these things off their books. Every time that they try to do some quantitative tightening rather than quantitative easing, as soon as they get to about 7 or 8%, like it's not even 10%, when they tighten and try to dump this stuff off their books, letting debts expire and so on, there is some kind of economic event. This was happening in late 2019. And of course, in 2020, there was massive economic disruption due to the public health interventions due to SARS coronavirus 2 spreading. But even without the whole COVID thing, there was still going to be a recession anyway. So in a way, COVID kind of, took the focus off of that. But anyway, there's a million different indicators, whether it's the Treasury yield curve inverting, that's another very reliable signal, this Conference Board Leading Index, recession's on the way. And so somebody was actually asking, let me get this off the screen, somebody was actually asking, what should individuals do if, there's a recession on the way? So it means a few things. First of all, layoffs are coming, so whatever you need to do there. If you're in a union, your union needs to start making preparations now to guard against layoffs and come up with alternative plans for the costs not to be put on the workers. So in other words, to fight back and to just keep the capitalists' troubles to them, but let the work continue without the mass layoffs. So that's one thing. Another is if you own any assets, it might be time to get out and sell if you can afford to do that, if that makes sense. And that's going to vary. Like somebody was asking cryptocurrency, should they sell their cryptocurrency? First of all, this is not an investment, a financial advising channel. But cryptocurrency, it's kind of anybody's guess. It tends to follow the stock market, but it's a very volatile investment, if you even want to call crypto an investment. But if you have other things, probably this is peak prices, and so it might be worth selling some of that stuff before the prices crash, especially if you do get laid off, to have some cash on hand. But again, it's just know that we're at the top right now as far as prices. If you go back to like 2008, 2009, 10, 11, and 12, there was kind of a long bottom there for a while where prices were at a low. And then they started slowly rising, late 2012 through 13, 14, 15, 16. By 17, 18, 19, they were getting pretty high again. And then in 2020, with the pandemic and all the extra quantitative easing being done, things just went, into orbit. So prices are at an insane high. It's made the housing market come to a complete stop, more or less, because not so much the mortgage interest rates, but because prices are just so high. You've got houses, worth 150 going for like 300,000 and sometimes more, as far as like what's affordable for random people. And then, basically all the prices got like doubled or tripled or whatever, depending on the area. So, at a certain point, it doesn't even matter what the interest rate is, whether it's like 5%, 5.5%, because it's just overpriced. The base price is overpriced. So anyway, this has been a lot of the kind of thing that I've been watching lately, and just sharing some of that with people. They're not communist channels. You got to take that into account. But if you want to look at some of the basics of how to analyze economic activity within capitalism, that can take you through some of the current data. What else do we have? Just shared this. This was Democracy Now! Has been doing pretty good coverage on Israel's genocide in Palestine, and they had an interview with Bree Newsom-Bass, who was commenting on Joe Biden, who recently was in a campaign speech and posturing against domestic racism in the speech, and then there were a lot of protesters there who started heckling him because, oh, you're talking about racism, but meanwhile you're politically enabling and funding and militarily enabling a genocide in Palestine. That's ethnic cleansing. You want to talk about racism, what are you doing about that? And I added, don't be fooled by the Democratic Party's deceptions. The struggle against bigotry and for equal rights can only be completed under socialism. You get some traction on this, and in capitalism, the bourgeoisie promises equal rights before the law. In reality, they can't really complete that promise. We can only do that by taking power away from capitalists and continuing that struggle outside of capitalist framework. Capitalism must be ended by the revolutionary force of the organized working class, led by a Marxist-Leninist party, which we still don't have yet, and the struggle largely will occur outside of the electoral system. So as far as the whole electoral struggles, it's about 5 to 10% of what people should even be thinking about, and it should not really involve the Democratic Party, except as far as how to defeat them. So speaking of things not worthy of support, another post there. This was a headline. This is from last July, so it's about six months old, but still relevant. Headline from Reuters: China's Xi gets nostalgic with, quote, old friend Kissinger. And so there's the quote: the Chinese people never forget their old friends, and Sino-U.S. relations will always be linked with the name of Henry Kissinger, Xi told him at this place where they were meeting. So there was, I feel like people mostly responded to this in the way one would expect, like, that's disgusting. Henry Kissinger is one of the most loathsome figures in recent history at all. And there were a couple of people bending over backwards to try to come up with a justification for this. My favorite one was the person who said something to the effect of, isn't this criticism that you're making of like cozying up to Henry Kissinger being a bad thing, isn't this similar to what liberals criticized Stalin for in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact? No. I don't even know what to say. It's not really worth comment. It's just sort of ridiculous on its face. This would be like after, let's say that the Nazis had won the war, and it came out that they did the Holocaust and the Holocaust was successful, uninterrupted, ran to completion. And then 30 years later, you just got together with like Hitler and Goebbels and we're calling them old friends. So yeah, that's not really the same thing at all. But these are the kinds of comments that I have to read in moderating this channel, and just be thankful that I do moderate it. Otherwise, you'd have to see all of them. Speaking of war crimes, so this was another headline. The Biden administration, I think this was from the AP, the Biden administration once again bypasses Congress on an emergency weapons sale to Israel. And so what did I have to say about this? Post was a little longer. Genocide Joe Biden can't get student loan relief done, or really anything of significance for the working class, but he will move mountains to get more weapons into the hands of racist colonizers. The 1% controlled Democratic Party of Biden is as much a part of the system as the GOP is, and it has been for 2 centuries. Remember, the Democratic Party first took the White House in 1828. Until the U.S. working class builds something for ourselves, this is exactly the kind of thing that you can expect to keep happening. And no one in the left should be involved in this party. It's not a party for you. It's a party for the 1%. It's an imperialist party, plain and simple. The USA will qualify the military aid that it's giving to Israel with statements about how Israel, quote, must take every feasible step to avoid harm to civilians. But let's be real. Every time the UN even tries to say anything about this, the UN, which, by the way, largely complete cowards, they may disagree with some of the approach that Israel is taking for this or that reason, but no one is stepping up and really doing anything about it, and that's been the case for a very long time. Every time the UN even tries to make a statement about it, the USA steps in to veto the statement. And materially, the USA is parking military hardware alongside Israel to make sure that no one dares to interfere with the genocide that it's conducting, which, to eliminate any doubt about their intentions, is accompanied by clearly, openly, brazenly genocidal rhetoric on the part of Israel. And then I quoted some of the stuff. But so Biden keeps saying this. He's like, I've asked for Israel to, keep those civilian casualties down. They're bombing hospitals, dude, and you're not doing a fucking thing about it. In fact, you're giving them, without you, they wouldn't be able to do it. And so calling for ceasefires, it's not immediate, it's not 100%, but generally speaking, ceasefires bring the violence down by 95%, and the USA is refusing to do it. Fuck you, genocide Joe Biden. Seriously. This is a genocide-enabling administration. And, I was watching some analysis of this, what is the Democratic Party thinking? And basically the people around Biden, according to this report, have calculated that the people who have already been alienated by this policy, they think that they can't win them back, and they're trying to hang on to the people who support the policy. But they're neglecting the people who haven't made up their minds yet, but that they will lose at some point. So, just incredible. I mean, not just inhumane and monstrous, but also just strategically completely out of touch, floundering. Every time I think I have a handle on what the people at the top of the system are doing or thinking or what I can reasonably expect, they do something that completely breaks my expectations for the worse. I'm at the point where it's as far as trying to predict what it's going to do, it's almost like I have to take what I think would be a staggeringly stupid thing to do and then just assume they're going to exceed even that. It keeps breaking my expectations. So anyway, what else do we have going on here? Speaking of Israel, this was another post workshopping some 2-state solution ideas that don't involve giving away Palestinians' land. How about a 2-state solution where part of the UK, who originally gave away Palestine, not their territory, but it was a colonial possession, according to the system that was in place in the 1940s, was a British colony, and they were like, hey, we love Jewish people so much that why don't you have someone else's land that we sort of used to dominate colonially? Hey, how about you actually give away your own land? Because that's actually yours to give away, and you could do that. So that's why some people are like, why not Germany? And in fact, well, there you go. You know, if Germans feel so guilty about the Holocaust, as well they should, how about you give away part of your land? But the whole problem is giving away other people's land. And so somebody else, I think a couple of people were talking about, what if they gave away part of Alaska to become Israel? And I guess there was some book written about that fictional scenario. So again, same problem. The USA and Canada are settler colonial entities. So you're still basically giving away other people's land. So anyway, horrible situation that has not gotten better. Over 20,000 people dead, half of them children, in Gaza. And they're just making Gaza uninhabitable, is what's going on there. So I think lastly for the community posts, BioBot, COVID-19 wastewater, measuring the levels of SARS coronavirus 2 in the wastewater. So this chart that you see on the screen, that's from last week. And at that time, United States COVID-19 wastewater levels, led by an extreme spike in the Northeast, are currently at the second highest level of the entire pandemic and rising sharply. So it's roughly around New Year's Eve that, you know, like that is the week, the last week of the year is basically the highest spread week of the year every year. And where we're at this year is it's second only to the Omicron wave. So is this a problem? Yes, we're going to read an article in a minute about the risk of COVID-19 reinfections, which is really written in tame language compared to the actual threat. But we'll read that, and then we'll augment it from there. But right now, COVID remains the number 3 cause of death in the USA. It also contributes directly to the number 1 and number 2 causes, which are heart disease and cancer. So the SARS coronavirus 2 directly injures the heart. That's the whole myocarditis thing, which you're more likely to get from the virus. There is some lower risk of getting it from the vaccine. Also, vaccinated people are less likely to get myocarditis from the virus because it increases your immune response to get rid of the damaging spike protein. But anyway, COVID can infect any tissue in your body, basically, that has ACE2 receptors, which is your brain, your liver, your lungs, your heart, your kidneys, lots of important stuff. It also attacks and kills T cells, which are one of the main pillars of your immune system. T cells go out and attack pathogens like bacteria, viruses, pathogenic fungi, and they also go through the body, and when your body detects nascent cancer, cells that start to divide in the wrong way, the T cells help to take care of that before it becomes, you know, a big cancer that gets, you know, run away and becomes dangerous. So you don't want your T cells to be attacked and killed by a virus. HIV is the only other virus that does that, and they don't do it in exactly the same way, but there are similarities. I know for me, when I had long COVID, and I've been avoiding it like the plague, I think that metaphor, actually, you don't have to say the like. I've been avoiding that plague ever since. But I had long COVID in 2020, I believe, stemming from a December, did I say 2020? 2021, stemming from a December 2020 infection, which completely wiped me out. I had the fatigue, I had the brain fog or brain damage that was impairing my cognitive abilities. I couldn't think straight, I couldn't hold thoughts in my head, my working memory was shot. But then that summer, I developed the worst sinus infection I've ever had in my life. I had to go on 2 rounds of antibiotics to get rid of it. That is not a thing that occurs to me, like, ever, pretty much. And this is also, we saw with the pneumonia going around, which seemed to be caused by common pathogens. So is this, you know, reduced immune function due to people getting infected by COVID? I think it's likely. You know, and I've shared the thing about the the sinus infection that I had to go on tons of antibiotics to get rid of. I mean, it was like a really, really serious infection that my whole like face was like inflamed and in pain. It was not just that I had, blood when I blew my nose. It was like my face was exploding. I've never had anything like that ever. Now, I happen to be in pretty good health otherwise, but if somebody who is in basically good health and, I take reasonable care of myself, eat an okay diet, stay physically active, and I was getting signs of just my immune system, again, kind of like an HIV patient, my immune system was just not fighting stuff off that it should be fighting off. That's really scary. So if you keep getting that, and, what are the long-term issues going to be? So anyway, SARS coronavirus 2 reinfections continue to cause organ damage and disability, shortening lifespans and reducing quality of life, even when it doesn't cause sudden immediate death. In other words, that's not the only thing you have to worry about. But that's last week's COVID chart. Let's look at this week's COVID chart. This is updated as of the 9th, I think, from last week's data, because it's always a week behind because they got to collate it and get it on the website. Look at where we are now. This is way above any previous level, and again, it's second only to the Omicron spike. Now, I've been saying all through 2023, we were in a lull, and then we had a fall bump, and then it would remain to be seen what happens in the winter. But otherwise, it was following the 2021 pattern really closely. And indeed, it's continuing to follow the 2021 pattern because we're getting a big spike. It's not quite as big as the 2021 winter spike was, but the same way that dwarfed what had been going on in the previous years, this winter spike is dwarfing what has been going on in the previous 2 years, in 2020 and 2023. So if you look down at the bottom, that's the regional chart, and that one's set to just the past 6 months. You can see that this is being led by an extreme spike in the Northeast, that yellowy orange section, followed by a very elevated surge level in the purple zone, the Midwest. Then even the Southeast, that pink section, is at like 850 or 900. That's well into surge territory. The West is a little bit lower. The West, I would say, is on the border between moderate and high levels. But the other three regions are definitely in surge territory. And just the Northeast is like just ungodly amounts. It's like 2,600. So, I mean, for reference, I would call low levels between 0 and 300 or 350. And then moderate levels, 300, 350 to like 750. Once you start getting above 750 into the 800, 900, 1,000, 1,100 range, you're in a surge. That's high levels. And then, so the Northeast right now is at like 2,600. It's just off the chart. So, and this has been sustained now for several weeks that it's been at really high levels. And as you can see, the Northeast starting to taper off. The other regions are holding kind of flat. But it doesn't look like the Northeast is even done yet. So now, if we are following the 2021 pattern, what followed 2021? Well, 2022, after the late winter and early spring lull that follows the winter spike pretty much every time, we had an unmitigated shit show of just sustained spread all through 2022. And so is that going to come up in 2024 again this year? I think it's possible. So what's the problem here? Because if you haven't died from COVID yet, aren't you safe? Well, no, because this is what happens with reinfection. The more reinfections you have, the more your risk of various health outcomes. This also goes up with age. So not every age bracket is at the same risk. And then there's other things, like if you're overweight or obese, which about 3/4 of the United States population is one of those two things, you're at elevated risk. If you have prediabetes or diabetes, you're at elevated risk. If you have like any kind of health condition, which if you're over 40 or 50, you're likely to have, you're at elevated risk. Now, is the risk elevated to where you're definitely going to get something that kills you? No. But it could set you back and age you 5 or 10 years. Do you want that? Do you want to be aged 5 or 10 years? Well, again, let's read an article here. This is from Time. So they're not really going to put alarmist language in a publication like Time. But they did come out with an article recently. Is it dangerous to keep getting COVID-19? And they did interview some good researchers whose names I recognized. So let's read it. Getting COVID-19 today is much less scary and more common, shouldn't be more common, than it was 3 years ago. By now, many people have had it not just once, but 2, 3, or even more times. Most of the time, repeat infections aren't as severe as they were the first time, which leads to a sense of complacency about getting COVID-19 over and over. But reinfections aren't harmless. As cases continue to rise and more variants arrive on the scene, infectious disease experts are warning that repeat infections could have cumulative, lasting effects. Let me point out as well that 1.2 million people have already died, and many others have been seriously sickened by this. People have developed disabilities and different things, and it's not getting the kind of coverage and spotlight that it should be. In fact, Joe Biden's press secretary was just asked about this, like, are you going to be recommending masks or anything? And the press secretary was doing this incredibly obnoxious thing of putting on a real show of appearing bored and annoyed by the question. Fuck you. I mean, again, how many genocides does Joe Biden want to have on his hands? Seems like he can't get enough. Anyway, quote, there is some early evidence starting to show that if you had COVID-19, there can be all sorts of problems after getting infected, unquote, and reinfected, says Dr. Robert Murphy, professor of medicine and executive director of the Havey Institute for Global Health at Northwestern's Feinberg School of Medicine. Quote, we are just at the beginning of learning about the problems that COVID-19 infections and reinfections can cause. A higher risk of long COVID. So this is one of the guys whose names I recognize from a lot of good stuff. Dr. Ziad Al-Ali, clinical epidemiologist at Washington University in St. Louis, studies long COVID, a condition marked by health effects that linger after infection. Quote, reinfection remains consequential, he says. In a paper published in Nature Medicine in 2022, he found that people who had gotten COVID-19 at least twice experienced higher rates of short and long-term health effects, including heart, lung, and brain issues compared to those who were only infected once. And by the way, if you're listening to this, you're on Twitch, odds are you're younger, you're maybe in your teens, 20s, or 30s. You are at least risk of developing these things, although you can, because you're younger, you're in better health, your body has less wear and tear on it. Guess what, though? That doesn't mean COVID isn't hurting you. It just means it's eating up the slack that you naturally have because you are younger before these things start showing up. So for you, it might not really show up until your 8th reinfection, whereas in an older person, let's say somebody who's 55 or 60, it might show up on their 3rd or 4th infection. But it's going to show up eventually, odds are. But why is this happening? Dr. Davey Smith, a virologist and head of infectious diseases at University of California, San Diego, says that certain characteristics, such as older age, may make people more vulnerable to complications after repeat bouts. Quote, the older you get, the worse you do with viruses in general, but specifically with SARS coronavirus 2, he says. Every time you get COVID-19 again and again, you increase the likelihood of having a worse infection just based on age. So again, likelihood, these are your odds. You might get it, and your dice roll might come up with, you getting a green light, but it might not. Underlying health conditions that people may not necessarily be aware of, like pre-diabetes or increased inflammation, could also put them at higher risk after each infection. Quote, for somebody who is already on the edge of developing diabetes, so pre-diabetes where your body is showing signs of problems with blood sugar metabolism, but it hasn't erupted into full-blown diabetes yet, that could damage the pancreas and the endocrine system enough to change things, Smith says. Similarly, having high rates of inflammation before COVID-19, whether it's due to some kind of autoimmune thing, allergies, whatever, could raise the risk of heart events, such as a stroke or a heart attack after an infection. I've seen this personally. People who, there was one guy who was like 40, I've mentioned before, who, yeah, was on the overweight side, again, like 3/4 of Americans, more or less, and young guy, but got COVID, had a heart attack just a couple of months later. And this is like kind of a common thing. COVID is known to be linked to increased risk of a heart attack, and then also it affects clotting, so the blood vessels, and so can cause strokes as well. Regardless of a person's health status, each COVID-19 infection can raise the risk of developing blood clots, which can travel to the brain or lungs. So this is like a deep vein thrombosis, DVT, that can be fatal. That's why Smith believes anyone who is eligible for antiviral drugs, such as Paxlovid, should take them. And again, there's issues there because they were shown, Paxlovid was shown not to have any effect on hospitalization for people who were under the age of 65. So, I mean, it's a shot in the dark. There's only so many treatments that they have. So, I mean, you know, it's like, it's between you and your doctor, but it's like, I guess try it. But whether it even works for younger people, we don't know. It doesn't seem to in some of the measurable outcomes. Anyway, so Smith believes anyone who is eligible for antiviral drugs such as Paxlovid, no longer covered by the government, by the way, should take them, since controlling the virus as quickly as possible can reduce any potential long-term or lingering effects an infection can have on the body. But you know, it'd be better not getting it at all. So in N95 we trust, wear your respirator, and you know, N95, KN95, FFP2, P100, there's different standards. Get at least an N95 or a comparable thing like a KN95 and wear it, avoid super spreader events, etc. COVID-19 may alter the immune response. I think may alter is critically weak in this case. I think there's substantial evidence of that. At this point, many people view COVID-19 as relatively benign, but even if you've recovered from a mild case, and remember, although having a severe case severe enough to put you in the hospital dramatically increases your odds of developing long COVID to majority odds as you're going to get long COVID if you're in the hospital. Most, like the overwhelming majority of cases of long COVID started out as a mild infection. So what seemed mild in the first 2 or 3 weeks turned into long COVID in the overwhelming majority of cases. So there's no guarantee that the reinfection will go as smoothly. Quote, just because you did okay with it last year, which again was a different variant, doesn't mean you'll do okay with it this year, Smith says. Quote, there's a mischaracterization in the public understanding that you can get an acute infection with fever, cough, malaise, and fatigue, get over it after a few days or a week or so, then bounce back and it's gone, says Al-Ali. The data are showing that some people still display increased risk of problems even 2 years after an infection, unquote. That's what Al-Ali found in his study. People who had multiple infections were 3 times more likely to be hospitalized for their infection up to 6 months later than those who only got COVID-19 once, and were also more likely to have problems with clotting, gastrointestinal or digestive disorders, kidney, and mental health symptoms. By the way, a key thing in some of the research that we've read in past years about this is probiotics. Probiotics are basically beneficial bacteria. You can get capsules of probiotics. There's different strengths of them out there. They're also found naturally in foods like yogurt or other fermented food that still has live cultures in it. Some of them are pasteurized out completely, but any fermented food that has live probiotics in it, you can make some stuff at home that is fairly safe to make. You can look up recipes for that online. Do be careful that you're using clean equipment so that you're not incubating the wrong, incubating pathogens. But yeah, you can do some fermented stuff at home that can be a sort of natural supplement of your probiotics. But basically, they found that because COVID or SARS coronavirus 2 can live in the gut, they often talk about a gut reservoir of the virus. It can alter your gut microbiome. So the bacteria that live, and you have a couple pounds of bacteria that live in your gut, they're involved in digestion, they're involved in neurotransmitter production, all kinds of really key, alchemy your body needs to do, transforming one chemical into another. The microbiome does a lot of it. So you need a diverse and healthy gut microbiome. You also have a skin microbiome and a mouth microbiome, etc. But your gut microbiome, supplementing that after COVID, they found in a study of mice that transplanting the gut microbiome from mice who had long COVID symptoms after a COVID infection, transplanting just the gut microbiome that was altered by the virus into sterile mice that didn't have a microbiome made the mice that they implanted it into develop long COVID symptoms like the brain fog. So restoring your gut microbiome health seems to be a component that can probably be beneficial in recovering from long COVID. So don't overlook the gastrointestinal stuff related to COVID. And probiotics are the actual bacteria. There's also prebiotics, which are types of fiber like inulin, which are basically miracle grow for your probiotics, for your gut microbiome. All right. So people who were had multiple infections, 3 times more likely to be hospitalized for the infection up to 6 months later than those who only got COVID once. And they're also more likely to have problems with clotting, GI disorders, kidney, and mental health symptoms. The risks appeared to increase the risks appeared to increase the more infections people experience. So at some point that would suggest this is becoming more and more likely to catch up with you. Could you keep beating the odds every time? Yes, somebody will. Just the probability is there's going to be somebody out there that even if their risk of developing long COVID goes up to 90%, they're going to come up with that other 10%. But for most people, it's going to catch up with you, and it gets easier for it to catch up with you with each reinfection. Understanding why SARS coronavirus 2 has a uniquely lasting effect on the body remains a challenge. Historically, when the immune system meets a new pathogen like a virus, it generates novel defenses and remembers the intruder. So it has a head start if the virus returns. So it has a memory, in other words. That's certainly the case with SARS coronavirus 2, which is why vaccines work and why getting reinfected generally leads to milder symptoms, at least for some period of time. But there's also growing evidence that in some people, getting COVID-19 the first time may compromise the immune response in a way that makes the body less likely to respond effectively the next time it sees the virus. That could leave certain organs and body systems, such as the brain. You need your brain. If you're not already sold on the importance of your brain, it's really critical. Take some time to look that up. Weaker for months after infection and subsequent ones. Quote, "It's the balance of these two opposing forces, the immune system learning from the past and knowing how to deal with a virus and do a better job the second and third time around, and the idea that a first encounter with a virus might alter the immune system in some way that it becomes less efficient. That could explain why some people get long COVID," says Al-Ali. So, again, there is evidence that SARS coronavirus 2 attacks and kills T cells. So that's going to impair your immune system. There's also issues with immune imprinting, where the immune system learns the first version, the first variant that you encounter, and it may not be able to update effectively to fight greatly mutated variants down the line. So there's that. Data also continue to show, so they didn't even mention the T cells thing in here, but look that up because there's information about it. We've also covered it in previous streams and things. Data also continue to show that even vaccinated people can get long COVID, although the risk may be lower, since the protection provided by vaccines wanes over time, just as it does from infections. So, correction to that, that's not just a function of time. So, the study that we've covered on this channel out of Italy showed that people had like a natural, people who are not vaccinated, had a natural risk of about 30 or 40% of getting long COVID, but people who were vaccinated, the risk dropped down to about 16 or 17%. So roughly 1 in 6. So the vaccines reduce your odds of getting long COVID, but they don't reduce it to 0. So, that's an important thing to remember, is that you cannot just vax and relax. You vaccinate as your plan B in case you have a mask failure. But plan A is always don't get infected. And that involves behavioral interventions like masking, and again, technically wearing a respirator, an N95, not just a cloth mask or a surgical mask, but an N95 with a tight seal or comparable. That's always plan A. Plan B is, stay up to date in case you get exposed somehow anyway. But, your risk of long COVID, even if fully vaccinated, I'm fully vaccinated, is not 0. So you still got to avoid that infection. Vaccines are therefore a strong but not absolute barrier to the virus. Also, they talk about the waning efficacy over time. That is true also with the, I think they just this season updated the vaccines significantly to deal with the new strains. I think we're still waiting on the data for that, but I know that prior to that, like last winter, the efficacy had really dropped down. Of if you were getting the old vaccines, they were not really nearly as efficacious at reducing negative outcomes as they were against the earlier variants. So I think they may have corrected that, but I think we're also still waiting on data. All right. Preventing reinfections. Quote, each time you get hit, it does impact your body, so let's not try to get it too many times, says Smith. That's easier said than done, since after 3 years, people are tired of taking... No. The people in power said, fuck it, take your mask off. That's what happened. This is like pretending that there's no political system, there's no government, there's no public health apparatus. Oh, people are tired of taking precautions. No, there is no functional public health system that can actually control this thing. That's the reality. They prioritize the economy over people every single time. Profits over people is how capitalism works. And they did half-assed shutdowns and half-assed mask mandates, and, then gave up pretty soon, like 4 months after Biden took office. So anyway, quote, we've lost the public health battle. There's no appetite for public masking or stringent public health measures, says Al-Ali. Well, we wouldn't really know because they stopped trying a long time ago. And in fact, when they started taking down the mask mandates in May 2021, a lot of people were shocked. Like, there actually still was strong support for that. Not among the reactionary right wing, but there was support for continuing to do that. But, the demographics that were more in favor of masking, poorer people generally, Black Americans, and, just generally not the people who get listened to less in terms of public opinion and government policy. So, have we lost the public health battle, or did they just give up trying? I think more the latter. That means that other strategies need to become available. No, it means we need to resume that battle, actually, is what we need. Like, how about just doing education in the first place, like not relying on these sort of softly worded Time magazine articles that most people aren't going to read? How about we had a functional public health system that educated people, that put up the chart that I had on the screen about the risks of reinfection? They posted them at every bus stop and in every school and at every mall and in every supermarket. Huh? How about that? How about you actually even attempt to go on TV and educate people about the risks of COVID and explain why you can't just keep getting reinfected and show studies that show that N95s work? How about you even fucking attempted that? But they're not even trying. So you can't say, oh, we've lost the battle and we need other strategies. They never really tried. Anyway, including universal vaccines that can protect against multiple variants. I remember that Walter Reed Hospital was supposedly working on that. It was like a D24 that on each of its faces had like a different version of the spike protein that would train your body against, 24 different kinds of spike protein. that seems to have just vanished off the radar. So, no word on that. And also nasal spray vaccines that stand guard at the nose. So if you can increase immunity at the point of infection, you may actually get sterilizing infection. Well, it's been 4 fucking years. Where are they? Which is, yeah. Researchers are currently testing these next generation shots. So while, quote, the good news is that these technologies do exist, they need to be accelerated and brought to market as soon as possible. When you're 4 years in, I don't think using phrases like as soon as possible is even legit anymore. To protect the public, says Paul Ali. Too late for the 1.2 million who are already dead and for the tens of millions more who are disabled. In the meantime, Smith says it's important for people to understand that they still need to do everything they can to avoid getting COVID-19. That means, and again, why is this information not out prominently in every public space, in every city and town of this country? Why? Because it might hurt business as usual and the political perceptions of Joe Biden's leadership, etc. That is why. This means staying up to date with vaccinations and taking some basic precautions, such as wearing high-quality masks indoors when cases are high. No, always, especially in crowded places and on public transportation. Quote, I wish we lived in a world where getting repeat infections doesn't matter. You mean like a world without a pandemic? Yeah. But the reality is that's not the case. Well, let's stand up for reality here and educate people about the actual risk that we are facing. All right, I had a couple of other things. I think, you know what, actually, let's keep plowing through this. So switching gears somewhat, actually, we're talking about health and Joe Biden. Here are 10 shocking predictions for 2024 from JP Morgan. So, the big capitalists that actually own and make the decisions in this country, they put out reports from time to time on what they expect is going to happen. They're anticipating an inhalable COVID vaccine. I'll maybe put this up in the community post because I do want to get into the chat and some other stuff. But they're also predicting that Joe Biden is going to step down and not run for president again. Let's take a look at that at least before we go. So this is one of the predictions. President Biden's withdrawal from the 2024 presidential election due to health concerns is one of JP Morgan's predictions for this coming year. In the list of surprises, Sembalest predicted that the 81-year-old POTUS would withdraw from the presidential race between Super Tuesday and the November election. So basically hanging in there just long enough to so that the DNC could say, oh, well, too late to have a primary now. We'll just have to appoint somebody. I think the whole lack of internal democracy within the Democratic Party is, I mean, it would be laughable. It's not even funny anymore. It's just infuriating. But this is the farce that people are still trying to get others to buy into. Don't believe it for a minute. It's an imperialist party. They do not give the slightest shit about anyone but the 1%. He also claimed that Biden would withdraw, citing health concerns as his reason for resigning from the primary, or the contest, and would hand the baton to a substitute chosen by the DNC. Quote, Biden has a low approval rating for a president with about 10% job creation since his inauguration. Well, does he really, or was that just compensating for the losses due to the massive public health crisis? Well, it's like the adjusting for inflation thing. Yeah, technically, it's an absolute gain of 10%, but what's the larger context? Is it just offsetting half of a 20% loss? You gotta ask these questions. Although that figure is the byproduct of his inauguration, coinciding with the rollout of COVID vaccines and a reopening U.S. economy, the JP Morgan strategist said in his prediction. So anyway, that's something. Speaking of other random, just little pieces of financial stuff, as we're talking about before, indicators of the health of the economy and an impending recession. Wall Street Journal reporting consumer credit tops $5 trillion. Everybody was expecting it to go up. That's a lot, though. And so what does this mean? It means people are living more and more on credit. That pandemic money is burned up, and people are tapping into various forms of credit just to get by and pay for their living expenses. All right, so that wraps it up for what we're doing with the various updates and screenshots. I do have some other comments that I want to get into. First, we're going to check in with the chat because I'm sure I'm way, way behind the chat, and I want to thank the mods again for doing what they do to keep the chat level, in line, and not overrun by trolls. Reminder, don't feed the troll. Just pointed out to a mod. But let me take one quick break. I'll be back in 1 minute, and then we will chat. Okay. Catching up with a lot of chat now. Still got 50 people in here. That's the exact same amount as there were before I went into all the current event stuff. Did everyone see the huge fascist rally in Italy? The whole crowd was doing the Roman salute, the Nazi salute. No. Third worldism is still very strong online, at least. I don't think most people know what revisionism is. I think in a few years, a lot of people will. I think also personally, a lot of people have asked, is this like a Maoist channel? No, this is not a Maoist channel. This is a Marxist-Leninist channel, but it is anti-revisionist. I actually don't like some of the things I see from Maoism, and I think, like, leave Mao behind. This isn't really about Mao. And I think, especially in the 70s, Mao got into some really, really questionable situations, and anyway, that's, no, not what this channel is. I came across this argument on Reddit that because Russia is not a highly developed monopoly capitalism with massive foreign investments, it actually is, though. It actually is. Just look up, here, actually, let me give you this. I was just looking at this the other day. Let me see if I still have the screen up. This is from, nope. That's what it was. Somebody was asking, is Iran imperialist? That's what it was. Okay. So this is from indexmundi.com, foreign direct investment net outflows as percent of GDP. So this will show you what percentage of the country's GDP involves foreign direct investment net outflows. There's also inflows, which is people or capital that's being invested in a country. But the reason that I set up this chart in this way is to show that Iran has really, really negligible net outflows. They mostly export commodities. Russia also exports commodities, but their percent of GDP as FDI net outflows, I mean, was like pretty comparable with France, for example. It recently, since about 2016, took a nosedive, but you know, for a while there was similar to like the U.S. or France. So yeah, no, Russia definitely is an imperialist country. They also definitely do have highly developed monopolies. But this is the kind of bullshit that people try to come up with now to justify their nonsense. So anyway, it's not in the imperialist phase. I mean, it was in a socialist mode of production. It had extremely advanced consolidated production that had heavy involvement of the state in the economy and all the other hallmarks of imperialism, and then it just got rolled back to capital, private ownership, to a capitalist mode of production. So, no, of course it's imperialist. It is in the highest stage of capitalism, absolutely. So, no, we've covered this a million times, too. But there's some of the FDI. This is also covered in the Is China Imperialist, or Is China an Imperialist Country audiobook that we did, which was quite extensive. But, yeah. No, you got clowns, like this is like Vulture, a well-known troll on Twitter. You know, yes, Russia is socialist, so is China, but China leads socialist development. Russia is not socialist. It does not meet any of the criteria of being a socialist country. But you can find people online saying any kind of nonsense you can imagine. It doesn't mean it's true. So those are the thoughts. Yeah, Hoxha is pretty solid, I must say. Really liked Khrushchev's phony communism as well, yes. I think part of the problem with China's criticisms of the USSR and Khrushchevism is it went down a really similar road, like literally 20 years later. Oh, thank you for the link to the South Africa-Israel thing. Yes, I am planning on doing the restoration of capitalism in the Soviet Union by Bill Bland. Yes. That's going to be on the second list of upcoming readings. Okay, Nick is trying to explain the linear systems thing. Essentially, contradictions in dialectics can be represented as a control loop with feedback and a feed-forward loop. You lost me. I'm sorry, I'm just not really speaking my language here. Yes, Russia was beginning capitalist development under the Tsar. They had a bourgeois revolution under the Tsar. Um, so this is honestly, Don Joe, you need to go back to like square one. The argument is that Russia wasn't capitalist under the Tsar. Who do you think was leading the bourgeois provisional government? Okay. Um, Capitalists definitely were a prominent faction in the 1905 to 1907 revolution and then the 1917 revolution. Feudalism was partly overthrown in Russia even prior to that, and then it was more formally ended with the reforms in 1905 and 1907 and so on. And then the capitalists were getting ready to take full control. But then what did the Bolsheviks do after 1917? This is the whole thing Lenin gets criticized for all the time. They had to continue some capitalist development for a limited, very short period of time under communist direction. And then Stalin started getting out of that as early as the 20s. So, and then they developed beyond all that. They developed production way beyond capitalist imperialism to socialism. And then there was a counter-revolution 30 years ago. And so the proletarian dictatorship was destroyed and capitalist gangsters came to power. But the economy was still highly consolidated, and yes, it's dominated by monopolies and state interference and the export of capital and all those other things. You living under a rock? Sorry, but like I'm tired of having this discussion 2 years into this Russian situation in Ukraine. I've sent some of your audiobooks to comrades in DSA. Wonderful. Yes, I am planning on going back to the Rosa series, but priorities got shifted around. But I still have that series marked. I want to finish the basic ML study guide stuff first, which involves reading Capital. It may not happen till like the end of this year. But yeah, I decided to move stuff around. I actually kind of prefer doing the books and articles. I think the streams are too much me, which is why I want to do them every other week or every third week. It's too much me. I really prefer teaching off of more established material. Not that I think I'm wrong. I just don't like listening to myself that much. It's not the sound of my voice. It's just, there are things that I do occasionally want to vent about. But to me, I can get most of that out just by making comments in an audiobook. So, and I like to really, this isn't about my opinions and what I think so much, but about what I can show you in the text and in the history. So I like keeping it really, really well grounded in that. And, most people just stream and they do videos that are just complete bullshit. It's just their uninformed opinion. I don't ever want to get into that territory. We start getting into more personal stuff sometimes from time to time in the streams, and it's just like, that is not why I'm doing this. So, anyway. Well, people should be doing some kind of reading every day. So that's what I think. But I like that you are taking the time to make notes and everything. This work has to be done. It has to be done. That's how I look at it. Best Marxist-Leninist readings ever. I've listened to other readings of the classics and they don't come close. Well, I'm glad it's working because, like I said, this work needs to be done. I'm planning on attending the DC protest this weekend. And thank you for the support. Any pro tips on how to be smart and safe about it? Look up guides from the National Lawyers Guild. They usually have good advice and trainings. I'm looking forward to cooking with S4A. I enjoy cooking, but I'm also very lazy about it, so I know my diet isn't as good as it really should be. Grow your own potato. We can definitely do some potato growing tips for sure. Tater tube. Yeah, like I said, so there have been a couple of different levels of support. For a while, the channel was averaging like $600 to $700 a month really consistently for like a year. And then it kind of went up rapidly to like 8, 9, 1,000. And then it's kind of stayed at 1,000 or just like between 1,000 and 1,200 for a while, which is great. I love that because it lets me just commit to this more as like a long-term project. Before I add anything else in, I gotta like do what I'm doing at this level, and then when it goes up. So let me put it this way: there's a lot of long-term supporters in the Patreon, in the Buy Me a Coffee, names I've been seeing in the comments and in the Patreon roster for a long time. I appreciate that support. I know you know that what we're doing here is we're trying to do the real thing, and you know, it's just every so often I'll see that number kind of slide up over the course of 2 or 3 months, and it stays there, and it's like, oh, I can expand my vision of what we're doing here. But I do have to pace it, and I have to kind of it genuinely changes my feeling of how much of how I approach this thing. There's also the thing now of like, we're at 19.4 thousand subscribers. I am no longer down at 3,000 trying to claw my way up with every little bit of like, you know, trying to just get in the spotlight and stay relevant. We're at the point now where the channel is more of a known quantity, and more than anything else, it's attracted a community of sincere people who are really trying to study Marxism-Leninism, you know, to be committed students of Lenin. So that's what it's about, you know, more than anything else. If I started doing drama like certain other channels do, yeah, we'd get a lot more views, but it would also be just attracting a bullshit audience, you know? I could sit there and just talk shit about other channels like as the main thing that I do. It's masturbation, and it's just feeding the drama brain, and it's embarrassing, honestly, because it's completely lightweight content that yeah, it gets a lot of views, it gets a lot of clicks, it gets you a lot of subs. You know why? There's a lot of just complete children and liberals online that's all they can handle, and that's all they're looking for. Turns out uploading, you know, weightier audiobooks that actually deal with real concepts in the history of Marxism-Leninism, it's not as popular. Turns out there aren't as many committed students of Lenin out there. That's okay, because we just need to connect with the ones that there are, and to, you know, expand that on a quality over quantity basis. I am trying to do it as rapidly as possible, but again, the focus is always going to be quality. I'm not doing this for my ego. I'm doing this because I literally think within a century there's no future for humanity if we don't get this thing done. Socialism is inevitable in the sense that if humanity has a future, it is a socialist one. It's not inevitable in that we have unlimited time to do this. There's a struggle to be fought and won, and when Marx was going, we didn't have extinction-level technology out there. And even when Lenin was going, we didn't have extinction-level technology. We are at that point now of ecological, you know, finding out the limits of ecological fragility and there are nuclear weapons and everything else. We have to get this thing done. And yeah, it's critical, and I hope more people continue to adopt that viewpoint and get serious and get real. All right. For the last 2 weeks, I've been making my own seitan for dishes, or seitan for dishes, and it's been really great so far. That stuff's pretty good, as long as you can handle gluten. It is literally like concentrated gluten, so yeah, that stuff is great. And I unfortunately actually lost. So we did a food discussion for like an hour, maybe 4 streams ago, and I was saving the last hour of it to become Cooking with S4A 0, because that was kind of the stream where I like committed to it, because I was like, oh, this food discussion is actually really good. It got deleted. I mean, I deleted it, but it was an accident. I was cleaning up, and I forgot that was there. So unfortunately, I think I lost it. But anyway, well, like I said, I think I want to focus on some other audiobooks that I've been just kind of, I don't think procrastinating is quite the right word, but there's other stuff that kept popping up. I need to push most of that other stuff away and just plow through it, and I know we can do that. Then once all that is done, and again, maybe like the Patreon has grown, I can commit to like doing that extra stream and all the extra research it's going to take to put together those reports. But all right, anyway. And yes, Russia was literally an empire, for sure. Yeah, beans. By the way, the secret cheat tip to unlocking beans, pressure cooker. Soak your beans, drain them, rinse them, pressure cooker. Will save you so much time cooking beans. Dry beans, that is. Yeah, you want to know if Russia was imperialist, go back to Lenin. I think he had a few things to say about it, for sure. The problem I find with a lot of these, the investor channels, is that they've been predicting financial meltdown for like a decade. Now, credit card stagnation and housing prices stagnation are pretty good indicators of a crisis. The problem is the economy has been, and so yes, a lot of the petty bourgeoisie does traffic in doom and gloom because that's their opportunity, that's their opening, and they all want to hear that. The thing is, sometimes doom and gloom does come around. They're not all equally good at predicting it, and some of them just purely hype it up, even when they know it's not right around the corner. That's why I tend to go for the more evidence-based, data-driven ones, and that's what I'm trying to share. But the other thing is that we are in really unusual circumstances. This top, the market top, the high prices, has been dragging on because the Fed keeps not letting it crash. They keep inflating it away, and now prices are like at a level that, again, even accounting for inflation, housing prices are worse than they were in the 05, 06, 07 bubble. So they've inflated it right back to where it was, and they don't seem to want to let it die. They've got it on life support, but I mean, the system pretty much like has embalming fluid in its veins at this point. They're just shocking it every 20 minutes to keep it going. And that's been tough for people to predict because it did look like a crash was starting. There was definitely a decline after late in the year in 2022. But then there was a bit of a rebound this year, and part of that was the SVB bailout, where the markets felt like, oh, the Fed has our back, they're going to keep things like this forever. I mean, the reality is they can't, because people run out of money and things crash anyway. But that is part of it. Like, it's not all just the channels were, or those analysts were wrong, or that they were deliberately just hyping doom and gloom disingenuously. We're in a really unusual situation where the crash is taking a lot longer than a lot of people expected. So, yeah. There's an investing podcast I used to listen to called The Phil Ferguson Show. His whole thing is that he's atheist and more science-based. I don't know. I've never heard of it. I'll see if I can put it in my rotation. But, again, that is more kind of the stuff I've been looking at lately. I was watching the TV at the dentist, and financial something CBS was on talking about a soft landing. See, that's what I'm talking about. That's what you get in the ultra mainstream mass media stuff, where the messaging that they put out through the CBS, the MSNBC, all that kind of stuff, that is stuff for suckers. Like that, they're trawling for victims, because the system basically works on winners and losers. So they need people to keep investing in the way that they want. Investing equals handing them your money. And they need people to keep behaving in the ways that benefit the people who already have the money. Now, again, it's a delusion, and you can see it from some of these petty bourgeois channels that they're going to take the system back with, they're going to buy up 10 apartment buildings and they're going to challenge the 1%. No, it just shows that these people are completely clueless on how power actually works in capitalism. You cannot, on just some petty capitalist basis, really give the system a run for its money. You, at most, are just going to get co-opted by it. But what happens in the mass media stuff is they're trying to manipulate investors completely. That's why they put all these really misleading reports, like, oh, holiday spending up 3.1%. Yes, there's a hand raised at the back of the room. What about inflation, which was also 3.1%? Yeah, we're not going to mention that. Why aren't they mentioning it? Because they're trying to make things, they're trying to present a deceptive appearance. They're trying to do a deception. Why are they doing the deception? So people keep giving them their money. People keep behaving in ways that make them richer. That's like the whole thing. So again, even watching independent capitalist analysis can kind of cut you through that complete mainstream bullshit. And again, it's not so that you can go out and like make a ton of investments. That's not the point. But as a communist, you need to understand what's going on with the system and how to read it. The party's over. Who was even invited? There you go. In before economic devastation. Huge layoffs coming in my O&G company next month, biggest since 2015. I have a job interview tomorrow for a teaching position. That's more the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Is just like, the last thing you want is for people who are in industries, and just look it up. Type in layoffs 2024 or layoffs 2023. Find out where the most layoffs have been happening. Is it in your industry? The last thing you want is, amid all your other woes of trying to exist under capitalism, the alienation, everything else, the last thing you want is to get out there and make some big purchase that you can barely afford and then get laid off and you lose your house and your family's living in a hotel. You can avoid that at least. You know what I mean? That's why it can give you just a leg up of not being caught totally off guard by what's happening. Crypto's a huge scam. I say that as someone who was an early adopter. Abso-fucking-lutely. I hypothesize that they will blame the crash on China or Russia or some ongoing conflict. Well, to be honest, I mean, war is inflationary, for sure. And the Russian invasion of Ukraine is having a direct effect on food prices because those are two major grain exporting countries. They export staples like wheat, sunflower seeds, barley, stuff like that. They don't just grow them, they export them. So other countries rely on that for food. And so that's increasing scarcity. Wars are disruptive to that kind of economic activity. And like Russia, for example, is putting huge amounts of, they're redirecting resources toward war efforts. So instead of going towards development, they are, in the short term at least, they're putting money into missiles and tanks and other things that do not increase quality of life. They, in fact, destroy capital and people's lives. So anyway, blaming China or Russia or some ongoing conflict to ensure an argumentum ad metum-based reason for World War III, so they can do war spending to bail out their stock market crash. Yeah, I mean, there's no limit to really they're willing to lie, for sure, and not tell people. Like, the system stops working if people know how it works, more or less, so, yeah. The U.S. is about to seize $300 billion in Russian assets. That'll be a bump to the economy, while also making the world hate the U.S. more. Didn't they already do that? I wasn't aware they were doing it again. What are the new assets that they're seizing? I was thinking about the Ukraine conflict. Does anyone else feel like it was suspicious that right after traffic was drastically lessened by staying at home type measures for COVID, and then they, quote, had to raise gas prices because of the Ukraine invasion? There's a number of things there. Putin was quoted as saying he didn't invade during Trump's term because he felt Trump was too much of a wild card, and he wanted more of a professional president in there that might have a more even-handed response or predictable response. So that explains some of the timing. But yeah, right at the beginning of the pandemic, the price of oil became negative. It cost more. They were paying people to take oil off their hands because the cost of storing oil was like, the expenses associated with that were greater than the value of the oil. So yeah, they had to make up for that money somehow, conveniently. But I mean, this is a dysfunctional system that causes misery across the board, and then they find ways to profit off of it. There are certain cases where it does look like some of the misery created is deliberate to profit off of it, but that's not always the case. I mean, there's misery also naturally caused by the system, and then profit seeking is natural behavior for capital. So, I mean, they're going to do that regardless. They will try to profit off of good times, and they will try to profit off of bad times as well. You know, look at wedding loans for a good example of, by pumping up, you know, first it was just the diamond rings and trying to make diamonds a cultural imperative. That was a campaign of De Beers to make diamonds a cultural imperative. But now it's like the cultural imperative is you have to have a wedding so big that you have to take out a loan. It's like taking out like a car loan. You need like a $50,000 loan to have this wedding, and if you don't, you're like a failure of a person. And you know, so I mean, they'll profit off of anything they can profit off of, no matter how much kind of manipulation has to go into it. Like this whole idea, this is actually, I think, something Chomsky said that is valid. Not a Chomsky fan by any stretch. But one of the things he said about how the whole premise of the market is that it sort of relies on rational actors evaluating evidence and then deciding which is the superior product, etc. If that was really the case, like, advertising wouldn't work, because ad campaigns, by and large, appeal to more irrational impulses, or, if not flat out, sort of irrational emotional manipulation, at least cultural factors that don't really have anything to do with the product and more with the image of the product. So, anyway, yeah. How did China go from criticizing peaceful coexistence to outright opening the country to foreign capital? Yeah. I'll always admire Enver Hoxha for being an unapologetic critic of imperialism and revisionism all the way to his death. Yeah, we need to pick that up, and I think in that the last thing that I put up from him, the Marxist-Leninist movement and the world crisis of capitalism, there are some pretty clear pieces of advice from him on what the role of the party needs to be going forward. Genociding with Biden, that rhymes a little too well. In this day and age, the Dems come across as so senile. It's beyond, like, yeah, I mean, it stopped being relevant like 30 years ago. Democrats do genocide with Joe Biden while at the same time, quote, denounce socialism in the Congress. Priceless. Feels like Blinken is at the controls now. Biden looks totally gone. He's got that gold-plated health care, but he's over 80 and has had COVID multiple times. You want to see something? Go back even 5 years. Look at videos of Biden then versus Biden now. I mean, being president is going to age anybody, but it's not just that. He looks like terrible now compared to how he's looking before. And he didn't look that good before. So many people are at work sick with COVID after the holidays, COVID or whatever else. I got questioned about my mask in an elevator by a coworker who is literally sick now every few weeks. I've been sick once in 4 years, pretty easy to do the math. Yeah, kind of like, I don't know, respirators work. I mean, maybe your coworker at some level was like, hey, I'm tired of being sick. You know, maybe they were curious because they were thinking of trying it. One can hope. I was accosted by an anti-vax activist while masking. I told him that it wasn't for COVID, it was for colds and flu. His brain did a 404. He wasn't expecting that. That's terrible. I mean, good for you, but that's terrible. Like, people have nothing better to do with their times. And again, it's reverse contagion panic. Contagion panic is like when people flip out about a contagion beyond the level that is supportable. The reverse contagion panic is when people flip out because people are taking appropriate measures because they don't want to think about it. It's a deep level of denial. This is a very sick country. I'm convinced that even if COVID was visible to the naked eye, they wouldn't mask just to own the libs. I think you're onto something. All right, scrolling here. I think people are becoming aware of lifestyle and diet solutions for health. And again, they're partial solutions. It supports your health, you know. Sleep, diet, activity, these are pillars of your health. And they can improve overall health and your risk of various conditions. In the end, we all die. But it is about quality of life and length of life. And, you know, that's like all these people that are like, oh, I don't worry about COVID because I like, you know, I'm on the Joe Rogan plan, like whatever diet, and I take the supplements. And it's just like, all you're going to do is like offset some of the negative effect. Like if you really were concerned about COVID and it wasn't just some weird game you were playing with yourself, you would be really interested in doing everything that you can do to protect your health. Like COVID can, here, I'll put it up on the screen. It's one of my favorite images actually related to COVID. And I never get, this literally always shuts people up every time. Actually, that's one of them, but even a mild case of COVID can shrink your brain the same as aging 10 years, study shows. Like, if you're really concerned about your health, there's the one I usually share. Even mild COVID-19 can cause your brain to shrink. That's from nationalgeographic.co.uk. And recent brain imaging, we've known this for almost 2 years now. Recent brain imaging shows that the disease can cause physical changes equivalent to a decade of aging and trigger problems with attention and memory. Okay, they say exactly why is still a mystery. We do know some about that. It's causing inflammation. It's directly infecting the brain and the brain stem. If you're seriously interested in health, there's no way you're not concerned about this. And if you're making excuses about it, you're playing games. You're not a serious person. So, and I say that as somebody who is interested in health. And, you know, I do take, you know, some supplements and vitamins and things, and like, you know, been vegetarian for a long time and try to do a lot of like antioxidant foods and like, you know, raw fruits and vegetables as part of the diet. I'm not like a raw vegan or anything, but, you know, I do smoothies and I do like green powders and stuff. Like, yeah, I try to take care of myself and do healthy things after not doing that so much, like, you know, earlier in life. And, yeah, I mean, it helps. So anyway, is vitamin D and exercise a substitute for masks? Absolutely not. Why are masks a COVID preventative and just being healthy is not? Asking for people who watch Joe Rogan. Because no matter how healthy you are, should you go around licking doorknobs, you know? Should you go around, like, dipping your sandwich on the, you know, stairs leading into, like, a public bus? No, because there's just shit and filth in there that is toxic for your body, and some of it's infectious, and it's gonna hurt you. the vitamin D and the exercise is about keeping yourself in good shape to ward off wear and tear, and if you do get an infection, that your body will be in the best shape it can be to fight it off. But that does not mean that like getting infected has no consequences. Vitamin D, a lot of people are deficient in vitamin D because they live in more northern latitudes and the sun is not sufficient for like at least half the year to get enough vitamin D from it. And in those months, people are usually wearing long sleeves and long pants too. So you're not outside because it's cold, the sun is weaker, and most of your skin is covered up. So a lot of people are deficient in vitamin C. It can cause mood issues, it can cause all kinds of things. I supplement with vitamin D. It's a decent thing to do, especially if you have darker skin. It's harder to get vitamin D. So especially if you have darker skin, you're living in more northern latitudes, ask your doctor. But I mean, supplementing with vitamin D, anywhere from like 2,000 to 5,000 IUs a day, is probably a really good idea. Can help ward off like seasonal affective disorder or like winter depression. All kinds of things. Vitamin D is really critical. You get it from the sun normally, a little bit from diet, and it is supplemented in some foods like cereals, and if you drink like cow's milk, it's in there sometimes, and other stuff. But yeah, I mean, getting enough vitamin D is really important, but it's not going to like stop you from being affected by viruses and stuff. Like maybe it will reduce your time of being sick, but I think these things have been politicized to a point that people have just abandoned common sense. And I think like absent the return of common sense and de-escalation of some of the politicization of some of that stuff, like because people literally are just doing self-destructive things to like own the libs or like out the groomers or whatever the fuck they think they're doing, but it's mostly self-destructive and pointless. So yeah, I get really annoyed with that because yes, we should have more of a focus on holistic health, on understanding the role of sleep, exercise, diet, and supplements, and healthy foods and various things. I think we should, but it's a lot of that discussion is really overrun with fucking crazies, to be honest. There's a lot of evidence-based stuff that suggests that, but then people take it to this level that's just like nonsensical, and then they start mixing in like fascist politics with it. So, it's why we can't have nice things. I live in Texas. No one wears masks anymore, even though COVID is an all-time high. Yeah, I was talking to some people, like, in some areas people are masking. I think in most areas people are not. Just tell the Rogan watchers where the crayons and coloring books are and walk away. So COVID literally causes immune damage similar to how HIV does and can lead to AIDS, including destroying T cells. Yeah, I mean, some people refer to COVID as airborne AIDS. It doesn't always result in such extreme damage, and we don't know why. Like in some people, it attacks T cells more than in others, or just like why there are different responses. But yeah, I was reading somebody else talking about their situation with COVID, and it was they were saying that their initial infection was mild. Like their bout of COVID is not what concerned them, because it came and it went. They had a cough, they had a runny nose, they felt bad for a week or two, and then it was gone. That wasn't the bad part. The bad part was when they went to their doctor because they had a chronic fungal infection that developed subsequently that their immune system was not fighting off, and their doctor said that their blood work suggested that they might have HIV. Well, they didn't have HIV. It was COVID. I desperately want the mask mandate back. Of course, that won't happen under this dysfunctional system. It's not happening under Biden. And of course, the Democratic Party keep in mind, the public health system in this country exists at the state level, too. None of the states were willing to try to do that. Some held out longer in May 2021, like held on 6 weeks after that, but they all went along with it in the end. On COVID, I picked up my partner from the hospital after a minor elective surgery, and no one was masking, staff included. I saw like 2 doctors and 1 nurse with a mask on. Yep. I think there were certain hospitals in some cities that did reintroduce mask mandates, but in late December. Why didn't you do this in October, like when the numbers started going up? It just doesn't make sense. The amount of times I've heard things like God's perfect immune system. What is people's understanding of biology? They think immune systems are perfect. Yeah, from conservatives, like where was that during the bubonic plague or Spanish flu? Well, it was God's will. I mean, these people are satisfied by such idiotic platitudes. But, yeah, no, your immune system is what it is. It's far from perfect. You are not bulletproof. Genocide Joe just gave up on COVID. Well, he had one of his COVID czar, Jeff Zients, was a guy with no public health experience. He used to work for Bain Capital, which was Mitt Romney's firm. That their expertise was in dismantling corporations and selling the pieces off, for profit. What do they call that? Corporate raiders. That's what his experience was, and they have him leading the COVID task force. So there you go. Only 18% of Massachusetts is even vaxxed. I don't know how that's possible. Is that just on the latest round? Because definitely the numbers for the whole country were higher than that on like the initial first 2 shots. Oh, dang, another leftist stream that talks about the reality of COVID. These are rarer than they need to be. I think, communists in general are rarer than we need to be. Joe MAGA. There you go. I hate the job creation discourse. Absolutely. Natural disasters make jobs because things get destroyed that have to be rebuilt. Doesn't mean that they are good. Stock market at an all-time high ass bullshit. Yeah, it is, because the stock market... Oh, you know what? This will take a second. Okay, yeah. So I may do a community post for this, but this is an article from Forbes titled 5 Predictions for an Economic Soft Landing. That is where like a hard recession is avoided and there's not like a big economic disruption, but just we come down from the high in a smooth and gradual way with all of the negative effects of that offset and balanced and so on. You're going to love some of these because, and this is coming off of a comment about the stock market, at an all-time high. A lot of times that happens even as a recession is underway, So, actually, I think even go back and look at, 2007. The stock market stayed high for quite a while, even after the recession was setting in. But it's happened multiple times. So, 5 predictions for an economic soft landing that were totally wrong by Matt Novak. This is from about a year ago, 11 months ago, February 7, 2023. If you listen to financial news these days, you're bound to hear one term over and over again, soft landing. That's the hope, underlined there, shared by many economic forecasters, that the Federal Reserve's interest rate hikes, an attempt to slow inflation by throwing people out of their jobs, won't push the economy into a brutal recession. The term soft landing was first coined by Professor Herman I. Liebling in 1973. Liebling worked at Lafayette College and was a top forecaster at the U.S. Treasury when he predicted a soft landing in the mid-'70s, which turned out to be horribly wrong. The recession of 1973 to 75 saw unemployment peak at a whopping 9%, and there was a 3.2% decline in GDP. The future is notoriously hard to predict. I should know, since I've been writing about past visions of the future since 2007. And it turns out nobody really knows whether the Fed's actions will actually produce the desired result, that magical soft landing. Inspired by a Twitter thread from user Michael Cantro, a chief investment strategist at Piper Sandler, I decided to look through newspaper archives to see just how common the term soft landing has been in recent history. And it seems like many experts are always predicting a soft landing, no matter how turbulent that landing actually turns out. So the first example, 1973 to 75, the September 3rd, 1973 edition of the New York Times introduced its readers to Liebling and the now common term under the headline, "Economists see a soft landing when the boom ends." Quote, Herman I. Liebling, a senior Treasury economist, recently spelled out some of the strengths in the economy that were absent in earlier episodes when government fiscal and monetary restraints helped turn booms into recessions. An ongoing capital good, boom, meaning business investment in plant and equipment, the New York Times wrote. This positive factor was reinforced last week by the latest Conference Board report on capital investment appropriations by large manufacturing companies, which reached record level in the second quarter. The appropriations precede actual investment spending, the New York Times continued. But the 1970s turned out to be anything but a soft landing, with soaring unemployment and an oil crisis hitting the economy hard. Then you have 1980. During the recession of 1980, employment peaked at 7.8% and GDP declined 2.2%. But in the lead up to that downturn, there were plenty of respected economists predicting that a soft landing was on the horizon. Under the headline, Soft Landing Economy Seen, the September 15, 1978 edition of the Desert Sun newspaper quoted Professor Liebling and his prediction that a soft landing was coming. Quote, a capital goods boom will provide a cushion, and I don't see an early ending of that boom, Liebling was quoted as saying. Maybe they shouldn't have listened to him again. 1981 to 82. So this was a W-shaped recession where it crashed, started to recover, crashed again, then recovered. The recession that started in the middle of 1981 after a brief respite in 1980 and early 81 was even more brutal on workers, with unemployment peaking at 10.8% and GDP dipping 2.8%. But there were predictions in 1980 that the economy would remain resilient enough for a soft landing. Finally, it's not Liebling, but they quote somebody else. The financially strapped consumer at some point will simply run out of money. Again, that seems to be happening now. The experts say, as evidence, the economists point to developing weaknesses in two of the most critical consumer sectors, the auto and housing markets. Again, that's happening now. They also point to declines in both real personal consumption expenditures and real disposable income, an article in the January 17, 1980 News Journal explained. The conclusion, we'll have about a 1.5% decline in real GNP this year. In effect, a modest recession, or as some put it, a soft landing. So they were expecting a recession, but just not a bad one. So, a soft landing. Then there was 89 to 91. The U.S. economy went into a recession in 1990, and unemployment peaked in 92 at 7.8%. And yet in May 1989, the AP ran a story about how the economy was headed for a soft landing. Quote, the soft landing thesis has gained many adherents. So just commenting like, this is just magical, this time is different, without any evidentiary basis for it, thinking. Like, all these people, they just get going with the this time is different chant. Brokers are calling old customers with new tips. Market letter writers are talking about 3,000 points on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Business Week magazine declares a soft landing will send the markets soaring. Stocks are exciting once again. But as early as October '89, people were already arguing that a soft landing was all in how you looked at it, especially if you looked at how many people were being thrown out of work. John Crudell, writing a syndicated column that appeared in an October 1st, 1989 newspaper, pointed out that the thousands of people who were losing their jobs wouldn't characterize the landing as soft. Quote, don't expect any of the 3,200 workers at General Motors Corporation's assembly plant in Lakewood, Georgia to be thrilled that the nation's economy is headed for a, quote, soft landing. All of them are headed for a hard landing on the unemployment line in the spring when the automaker shuts the plant because it isn't selling enough cars. Then, 2007 to 2009, the U.S. economy saw unemployment hit a peak of 10% in 2009 during the Great Recession, and GDP slipped by 5.1%. But back in 2007, there were plenty of predictions that Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke was going to guide the economy into a soft landing, even with the implosion of housing in the U.S. Quote, since becoming the chairman of the Federal Reserve last February 1st, Ben S. Bernanke has steered the U.S. economy to an apparent soft landing amid a housing recession. Wow. I'm like, my head is spinning a little bit. Can you believe this? Like, it's just fucking every time. Ben Bernanke has steered the U.S. economy to an apparent soft landing amid a housing recession, stepped out from his predecessor's long shadow, and made decision-making more democratic atop one of the world's most powerful but little-known institutions, unquote, one glowing article that appeared in the January 21st Billings Gazette read. It didn't turn out that way, as anyone who lived through the Great Recession can tell you. It wasn't exactly a soft landing. So, yeah. I don't know. But this happens like every time you can find people talking about soft landing, and they keep cheering it. Actually, the intensity with which they are talking about a soft landing leads me to conclude that it's going to be one of the hardest landings of all. Why? Because it's like they need to tell the public the opposite of what they think is going to happen, because they need fresh victims. They need people to not, catch on and smell the blood in the water, and they need people to just keep going on as normal. But also just the amount of hypnosis they're trying to do with just repeating this over and over again. It's it's the doth protest too much thing. It starts to get conspicuous after a while. People are in complete denial if they think that things are in any way better because of the Biden administration. Yeah, things are terrible right now. Thank you for doing this every Thursday and for doing the book readings. Yeah, yes, we're only streaming on Twitch right now. I do save the recording, edit it up, and post it on YouTube later, or part of it sometimes. US-UK about to bomb Yemen. Yeah, they're trying to get the Red Sea shipping channels open. Yeah, we may not be streaming every week this year, but definitely, at least every other or every third week. But good. Glad you appreciate it. All right. I like S4A fluff way more than most. I've fallen off of Black Redguard pretty hard since listening to his streams more. I mean, there's a certain amount. I call these office hours because I do like to discuss the material outside. I mean, I do comment and introduce the material, but, I do like to just kind of do more free-form stuff occasionally. I'm feeling like, every week, I don't know. Sometimes we do every week, sometimes we don't. But yeah, I would like to see more people getting out there. But really, beyond more people doing channels, what we really need are Marxist-Leninist groups forming and then starting to influence the masses. That's really what we need. This is, in my opinion, the most interesting channel. The readings and analysis really help the motivation and excitement to learn. Good. I mean, yes, to be a Marxist, you do have to educate yourself and read the text. You can't be a Marxist without doing the studying. Yes, it's a science. And we're trying to help facilitate that, and then people can also form study groups. In the end, we need to build an anti-revisionist Marxist party that can actually do the thing that needs to happen. I think we're not there yet, but, that rather than just YouTube channels, we need a communist group that is going to be strong enough to take some leadership. So, yeah. Nothing like a consumer economy where no one can afford to consume. Well, so this is what causes the boom-bust cycle is Marx and Engels talked about it back in the 1840s. It's characteristic of capitalism, overproduction crises, which are recurrent. So recurrent overproduction crises. What happens is capitalism has increased production a lot, but then there is more production than people can consume, and then they have to throw people out of work, and economic activity contracts until all the excess stuff gets consumed, and then production and employment can resume again. Conversely, socialism has to go so far beyond this to create abundance to sustain itself Because kind of the premise of socialism is you're going beyond surplus to just unlimited production that can meet people's needs, like, regardless. So, if, in other words, prior to class society, there was no surplus, and people pretty much were hunter-gatherers living hand-to-mouth, more or less, and there was no ruling class because the survival of everyone in the group depended on everyone's input in the group, and so it was very egalitarian in that way. Once there was surplus, then class society developed. We get out of that by increasing production so much that just like a finite surplus is no longer really a thing. And so that sort of the need for a ruling class, or that opportunity for a ruling class, is transcended because surplus itself is transcended. I think a lot of revisionists act like mechanical materialists rather than dialectical materialists with how they act towards social costs of their revisionism. Canada's mainstream media is already starting to blame economic downturn, budding recession on the immigration policy. So yeah, they'll blame like whatever scapegoat is like least able to defend themselves. And that also furthers, other political narratives that are beneficial, advantageous to them. It appears as if $300 billion in Russian assets were frozen, and now Biden intends to actually acquire them to fund Ukraine. Gotcha. Okay. I thought that was already a done deal. Thank you. I went into work yesterday and my supervisor told me that I could not clock in early yesterday because the company, quote, went over on labor. That's one way to put it. Yeah, we would not have the same kind of advertising in socialism. First of all, you don't have people competing for profit. So, advertising could actually focus on just explaining new developments in products and what they do. Yeah, ads are terrible. I have 4 different ad blockers enabled. It wasn't COVID related, but for most of 2023, I couldn't walk, and that taught me a lot about what it's like to be disabled and how the medical system, we should put system in quotes, works overall. It's very dysfunctional. Yeah. My Marxist book club is doing a topic on anarchism from a critical perspective. Are there any readings you would recommend? We have On Authority and The Bakuninists at Work on the docket. Yeah, I have a Marxists on Anarchism playlist. Let me dig it up for you. I hate that YouTube, they reorganized the playlist tab to make playlists harder to find. I have some stuff on there. The Bakuninists at Work is definitely a good one. There's Political Indifferentism. I'll give you the link, but let me read it out just for the recording. What's on this playlist right now? It's not super long. Come on, YouTube. Okay. On Authority, political... Although, I've been finding more and more anarchists are finding ways to just completely dismiss On Authority, so take that for what it's worth. Political Indifferentism by Marx, 1873. The Bakuninists at Work, I love that one, 1873, Marx and Engels. Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, 1880 by Engels. Anarchism and Socialism by Lenin, 1901. Socialism and Anarchism, 1905 by Lenin. Anarchism or Socialism, ? By Stalin, 1907. There's a thing in Chapter 2 of The National Question, 1909 by Rosa Luxemburg, and Chapter 3, it's discussed. Oh, because Chapter 2 is about the nation-state and the proletariat, and Chapter 3 of The National Question by Luxemburg is about federation, centralization, and particularism. And that discusses the kind of anarchist vision of federation and breaking things into small pieces, also discussed in The Bakuninists at Work, versus socialism, which prefers large states over small ones. In general, there are some situations like dealing with national oppression and national liberation where there would be exceptions, but all things being equal, Marxists prefer larger states over smaller ones. As far as like centralization and bringing things under the same authority, larger as in larger geographic areas, larger amounts of people under the same state rather than fragmented into different states. Now that the size of the state is bigger. I mean, like the government itself, government apparatus. Also, The State, a lecture given at the Sverdlov University by Lenin, 1919. On Cooperation by Lenin, 1923. And then I have some other stuff in there. On Terrorism by Bill Bland. Differences in the Labor Movement by Lenin. Interview between Stalin and Roy Howard, 1936. Actually got to redo these. I did also... There's a stream, if you want to look up, not that long ago, where we did the reading of... I'm laughing to myself just thinking about this. The stream with Feral Individualism, where it was like talking about how this person's highest political ambition was basically to just like be naked in the woods. It was just ridiculous. But this is like a lot of anarchism when you kind of break it down. So here's the playlist that's in the chat. A Forgotten Genocide, the Congo Free State. Belgium is responsible for this one. Thank you for that. Because of so many people becoming disabled by COVID, governments are trying to redefine what counts as disability to make fewer people eligible for benefits. Yeah, they did make long COVID last year a condition that is eligible for disability. The problem is, that determination can be contested. A lot of doctors are not necessarily up on the research of how to determine long COVID, etc. Yeah. Yes, genocide and capitalism are inextricably intertwined. This is why it's like you have to talk about anti-racism. If you're trying to get at the roots of capitalism, you've got to talk about this as well. The people trying to push class reductionism are not doing anyone a service when capitalism uses racism, sexism, cis-heteronormativity as, as the kinds of social weapons that they use them as. You've got to go there. If you're not promoting an understanding of capitalism that promotes an understanding of the way that capitalism uses those things as some of its main weapons, and just try to gloss over it with like, oh yeah, we don't talk about racism, or like I'm post-racist. Like libertarians try to do that. It's not helping anyone. Or ableism, as we're talking about with disability. And that's something that, I feel like for myself as well, I continue to learn more about that. There's actually a great list. I'll try to find a way to promote this, but let me see. There's a patron who has a link tree, and it was related to capitalism and disability. Let me see if I can share that here. Here it is. So the address is linktr.ee/capitalism and disability. And there's a lot of resources on here. I'll put it in the chat right now. And I'll try to find a way to promote that. Maybe I can probably just do a community post about that today, promoting it, actually. But yeah, there's a longtime supporter who put that list together. And I think it's worth a look. It's a Wall Street Journal article about cancer in young people. Doctors baffled. Well, if they just stayed up to date with COVID research, they might not be so baffled. Yeah, Biden isn't going to bring back mask mandates, no doubt. Before Biden hired the current CDC director, they tweeted about wanting to tell people the usefulness of vaccines and masks. Once they were hired, they stopped talking about masks entirely. This was even the case with Walensky, who wound up being terrible. Rochelle Walensky was the last director, and she was kind of a COVID warrior, and then she got in, and she got the talk, and then she went out of her way to avoid talking about masking, let alone the actual policy changes she made. Cancer rates in children are going up. T cells are responsible for fighting cancer, we know. Yeah, I mean, like the whole immune system, but they're a key part. All right, thank you, Nick, for being here. T cells are being killed, and carcinogenic chemicals in the environment continue to build and build. The next decades will probably see large cancer rate increases. I mean, they already have. If you go back a century ago, the cancer rates were like a tenth of what they are now. I probably have that number wrong, or it's outdated anyway. But yeah, it's like cancer rates in like 1900 versus 2000, it was like 11 times higher. So is part of that diagnostics? Yeah. Is all of it diagnostics? No. My mom does chemical analysis for the Pennsylvania Bureau of Labs, and I remember her talking about PFAS in like 2016. It's scary, and it just continues to get worse. Yep. Chemical analysis of water and soil samples specifically. The PFAS really puts us in a spot where we have to explain to people the only way to fight mass pollution and climate change is to cease all production involving in that, and capitalists just simply are not going to do that. Plastic is cheap, styrofoam is cheap, and they're just also byproducts of petroleum processing, and so that's also tied in with fossil fuels. Yeah, the non-stick coat Teflon, that can be toxic, especially if it gets burned off of the pans, or if it flakes off. Yeah. How soft is this landing? Soft as concrete. Yeah, there are now non-stick pans without PFAS, which is the forever chemicals that are turning up in rainwater all over the world. We did that in very early streams, like going back to like single digits or teens, S4A live streams, I think. Or if you want to put an effort, you can do cast iron. Yeah, properly seasoned cast iron is non-stick. Also carbon steel woks, which also gets hotter. That's not always good. Sometimes cooking foods at really high heats can make not good chemicals, especially potatoes, for one example. But yeah, carbon steel, cast iron. There's other kinds of non-stick things that aren't just the coated aluminum. Like, no doubt, it's great to have the ability to do things non-stick. I mean, I have a lot of stainless steel, and yeah, it's a pain, having to only cook things that don't stick, because if you do anything that sticks, it's just like glue in the bottom of the pan. Non-stick is awesome. The problem is it's toxic, so, there's consequence. So, hence, you can get into cast iron or again, the carbon steel. No, I have not done a cooking stream yet. I was saying I'm going to wait for the channel to shift into a higher level of support. I mean, the level of support has been growing over time. If it starts declining, and I hope it doesn't, but we'll reassess. But I can't add anything else in now. I took a hard look at that, and I'm already pretty maxed out as far as my commitment in relation to the support. So again, if once we reach a higher level of support, then I'll think about adding that in. But I did take a hard look at that, and I just can't do it right now. The oil-producing nations are betting on a resurgency of supersonic jet travel because it uses like 5 times more fuel than regular jets for getting twice the speed of regular air travel. So diminishing returns on the fuel in relation to the speed. And using much more fuel, then you got to sell more fuel, you got to buy more fuel. And I remember Democracy Now! Actually was covering the latest climate change summit. There was actually like tons of fossil fuel people masquerading as environmentalists there. So that's going well. Okay, I've talked to people who lived in the USSR and Yugoslavia. A lot of them tell me about how the, quote, ideology was good, but that people were killing each other. I need some more specifics on that. They said that no matter how hard you try, you can never achieve socialism because it's against our nature. No, that's a terrible argument. I know this isn't true, but how would you get through to that? I mean, I would probably ask them a lot more specific questions about what they're talking about. In relation to Yugoslavia, Yugoslavia was revisionist and never solved the national question in a Marxist-Leninist way. The USSR made gigantic strides forward for national freedom, for national development of a lot of the different ethnic minorities and just all the different peoples that lived in the Russian Empire. So, no, it was actually a huge step forward. There eventually was a reversal of socialist construction and a reemergence of nationalism. In the case of Yugoslavia, it was really catastrophic. In the case of Russia, I mean, it's still not nearly as bad as it could be. But yeah, I don't know what else to say because I would have to see the conversation to kind of try to find more of an end. I just go through the people asking about where I'm at in the chat. I just go through the chat chronologically. I think I'm near the end now. Yeah, I mean, so, okay, that's what they were saying, particularly in Serbia. The Serbians in the late 80s, just before the war, were already spouting nationalistic ideals and rallying people. That's what they claim, but I didn't live there, so I don't know. Hoxha wrote a lot about... Hoxha was a gigantic... This is Enver Hoxha of Albania. Was a huge critic of Yugoslavia, being just to the south of Yugoslavia. Had a lot to say, and Yugoslavia was also antagonistic towards Albania and tried to make Albania part of Yugoslavia. But as he was saying, I think it was in Yugoslav Self-Management, a Capitalist Practice. I got that title slightly wrong, but we have an audiobook of that on the channel. I think it's in that. Here, let me look it up. Self-Management. Hoxha. Capitalist. See if I can just read you the passage. Yeah, Yugoslav self-administration, a capitalist theory and practice. Okay, so chapter 3 is, quote, self-administration and anarchist views on the state, the national question in Yugoslavia. So in Yugoslavia, organs of state power as genuine representatives of the people do not exist. There's only the bureaucratic system called the system of delegates, which is presented as the alleged bearer of the system of state power, and that is why no elections for deputies to the organs of state power are held. The Titoites want to justify this fact by arguing that the representative organs are allegedly expressions of bourgeois parliamentarism and of the Soviet socialist state, which according to them, Stalin had allegedly turned into an institution of bureaucracy and technocracy, and so on. Let me skip to this point. Tito and the renegade clique around him did not carry out a Marxist-Leninist national policy in regard to the tendencies of republics and regions to break away from the Federation. On the contrary, the relations among nationalities remained the same as in the time of the kings, and in regard to some nationalities, the genocide went on as before. This policy served to fuel the hatred and quarrels among the nations and nationalities of Yugoslavia. The, quote, unity and, quote, fraternity of peoples, about which there has been a great deal of talk in Yugoslavia, has never been presented on the just basis of the economic, political, social, and cultural equality of nations and nationalities. Without achieving equality in these fields, the national question in Yugoslavia cannot be solved correctly. For about 3 decades now, apart from its demagogy about the self-governing community of nations and nationalities of a new type, the, quote, self-administrative socialism has done nothing about the implementation of the sovereign rights of these different nations and nationalities in the different regions and republics of Yugoslavia. For example, the Kosovo region, with an Albanian population almost 3 times greater than the population of the Republic of Montenegro, has a marked economic, political, social, and cultural backwardness in comparison with the other regions of Yugoslavia. So, from an objective and scientific analysis of this very difficult and troubled situation, the incontestable conclusion emerges that the national question in Yugoslavia will not be solved unless Marxism-Leninism is implemented there. That is to say, unless the so-called self-administrative capitalist order is overthrown. And the national question in Yugoslavia will be solved by the peoples of the present federation, not by those who, regardless of what they say, are in fact still pursuing the reactionary, chauvinistic policy of their predecessors. And yeah, so if you want to check that out, it's Yugoslav, quote, self-administration, a capitalist theory and practice. And that is well before the 90s. So when is this from? This is from 1978. So Hoxha already saw that coming. Again, like a Marxist-Leninist observer of the situation in Yugoslavia saw that, and he goes through in more detail about how they had this system of cooperatives, and which essentially amounted to competition among enterprises and regions. So then it led to bourgeois thinking, which includes the fomenting of national and ethnic tensions for the sake of pursuit of economic advantage in that competitive situation. So because that was never solved in a Marxist-Leninist way in Yugoslavia, because Yugoslavia was revisionist, that is why there was such particularly awful ethnic fighting after the official breakup of that system. So I hope that helps. All right, we're running a little late, so I'm going to just kind of skim through the chat. I will stop in on anything else that is particularly salient. Anarchists need to read A Tax in Kind by Lenin because they loved the state capitalist argument. Absolutely. I think it's The Tax in Kind, but yes, we have that on the channel. Did anyone listen to the newest One Dime episode? I'm glad you brought that up. He had on a guest from Theory Underground talking about the PMC thing. It seemed like he was spouting some pretty shitty reactionary things. Yeah, I wasn't aware One Dime was even a communist. He has a bunch of videos about the Cultural Revolution. It was not... I was trying to listen to the most recent one. It was not well written and unlistenable. I listened to about 5 minutes of it and had to stop. Speaking of One Dime, he made tweets defending the victims of the Great Purge for their, quote, different political opinions. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about with the Cultural Revolution videos. I was just like, who is this person? What are people's thoughts on the group Palestine Action? I'm actually not familiar with that group. But I'll check it out, and maybe the next time we meet I'll have more of something to offer about it. Alright, I think we're getting close to the end here. One Dime seems to be getting philosophy brain. Yeah, and again, the writing was not quality either, I thought. Watching S4A makes me feel like I have way, way, way more research to do. It took me about 3 years before I felt like I really knew what I was talking about. So, yes, you have to study. It's like learning anything else. I just got my copy of Capital and State and Revolution by Lenin, which I wouldn't have done without your constant reminders to read the texts. I don't even know what the word revisionist really means. Thank you for opening me up to these topics. You're welcome. And remember, Marxists.org has all this stuff for free online. So if you like physical dead tree books, as people say, then do that. Actually, we had a question about revisionism. Just going over some stuff that people had sent in the YouTube comments. Here's a question. Okay, this was on something in the Sino-Soviet playlist. Another excellent one, comrade. One question, though. You dislike revisionism a lot, even calling other Marxists who appear, and I think that appear is the key word here, because if you know more of the historical differences, if you know some of the ways that bourgeois ideas have tried to infiltrate the Marxist movement, I mean, yeah, it can appear similar. The whole point is they're trying to deceive you, but they're not. So anyway, I don't necessarily disagree that others like the Deprogram and Richard Wolff don't have considerable blind spots. They do. No, it's fucking revisionism. Call it what it is. But is there not another perspective? No. To a certain extent, you could call any additional theory revisionism. No. Revisionism has a specific meaning. It means taking core theses of Marx and Engels and stripping them out, making the overall theory inaccurate. Okay? So that's revisionism. It doesn't just mean changing things. It means taking out key elements. Okay, so the revisionism in this case is revising core theses. For example, a very common one is the need for social revolution. That's a thing that anti-Marxists posing as Marxists like to take out. So Rosa Luxemburg's Reform or Revolution handles this in detail, as do Lenin's various writings against Bernstein as well. All right. So revisionism is not just changes, it's things that are fundamentally against core theses of Marx and Engels. Continuing, Leninism is quite literally a revision of Marxism. No, it isn't. Leninism is Marxism updated for the age of imperialism and proletarian revolutions. It is not contradictory to Marx and Engels. It is just bringing it into the 20th century because capitalism had reached its highest stage, imperialism, which it had not done prior in Marx and Engels' time. So, no, it is not revising. It does not contradict Marx and Engels. All right. And Maoism is a revision of Leninism. Now, to the extent that there are certain left deviations in Maoism or Mao Zedong thought, then perhaps. But no, updating Marxist theory to fit new conditions of capitalism, like imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, that's not revisionism. Is not a certain degree of revisionism healthy? So we need to, before we start typing out comments, we need to understand the meanings of words. Yeah, so revisionism is not any old change. It's anti-Marxist, or I mean bourgeois ideology infiltrating the communist movement. And when it does that, it goes against core tenets like the need for social revolution. And a key piece attacking revisionism early on is Rosa Luxemburg's Reform or Revolution. We have it on the channel. Definitely listen to that if you haven't heard it before. And goes directly against a lot of what Richard Wolff says. And just something like Lenin's Marxism and Revisionism, that's another one. So, yeah. I wonder how much they'll blame Iran to manufacture consent for war. I've been reading this report from the Brookings Institute. It's interesting. 2016 Iran strategy. Interesting. I'll take a look. You are welcome for the revisionism discussion. Definitely. Okay, apparently the audio is getting choppy. We're done anyway, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Thanks to everybody for stopping in. It's about a 3-hour stream. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming in and helping to make the stream what it is. I could sit here and just talk, but it wouldn't be nearly as interesting. Did that a little bit in the beginning. But yeah, no, I appreciate these chats. They do take a lot out of me. It's a lot of talking for me. So we may or may not do next week, but in any case, there will be definitely audiobooks, trying to keep plowing through the list, and I'm really enjoying that. So yeah, appreciate you all. Appreciate the patrons. Appreciate the Buy Me a Coffee supporters. It really helps. And again, it helps me to keep getting the quality level and my commitment to this channel reconsolidated and reorganized to be higher and higher quality. So at least from my opinion, that's what's happening and my perspective. So thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.